good afternoon, good evening, or it's 2 a.m. Good a bit already. This is Eagle Eyes on Tech. I'm Eagle Falcon. We've got a lot of catching up to do today. You have no idea. Unfortunately, it was because I forgot when Computex was. And spoiler alert, that was this week. Well, this past week, anyway. So, there is a ton of hardware news out there. But first I want to start with something that showed up. What the? No. Okay, so my soundboard is glitching out. That's fantastic. I'm glad things work when I need them to. But in any case. So Motorola put out this video about their upcoming announcements, and I'm going to play it for you. So just listen in. So it's basically showing like a high school sitcom sort of scene. Everyone with their dated Motorola flip phones. Alright, and then it had the date at the end of June 9th. So the announcement's coming up next week, so we'll find out what they'll talk about. But the whole preview for their announcement was nothing but Saved by the Bell, basically, with the Motorola Razr. Now, if you're around my age, you remember when you were in high school and you thought that the Razr was just the tightest shit out there. It was cool. And your parents never, and either you were lucky enough and your parents got you one, or you were like the overwhelming majority and your parents thought that spending a couple $100s on a flip phone was dumb. And even in the modern day of $300 down payments and paying off the rest of it over 2 years for phones, it still sounds dumb. But in any case, this caused the entire tech world to instantly assume that Motorola is going to try and bring the flip phone back. And based on that video, I don't think that's the case. I don't. I think that is more of Motorola saying that, you know, we are bought by Lenovo, we've changed hands a few times, but on our new, whatever we have coming out on June 9th, it's going to make us hip again. Just like in the 90s. Just like the good old days. When the phrase "Hello Moto" was uttered in classrooms. Or hallways. Or whatever. Now, I have the minority opinion on this. But I'm not the only one. We go to Ecumenical News, and they pretty much have the exact same idea that I do. That they think it's silly. that Motorola would take a trip back to the flip phone. Now, granted, it could be interesting if they had, like, say, a device that was the size of, like, the Note 5 or whatever. Pick your phablet, your giant ass, small textbook sized phone. If they did that and had that be a flip phone, where the bottom screen could have your numerical keypad and then a texting keyboard, and then the top half be a 2.5 inch touchscreen, that could be interesting. I seriously doubt that would happen because that just sounds like a pipe dream that'll never catch on, and just imagining it, you probably think it's about as ugly as I do. But that's that. The article goes and analyzes the video a little bit. But this news site here assumes that it's going to be talking about the Moto Z. What is the Moto Z? Nobody knows. It's an internal code name that's popped up here and there, but nobody has any definite answers as to what it could possibly be. So no one knows. For once, the internet is stumped as to what Motorola, now owned by Lenovo, plans on doing. Kind of like how the internet is kind of stumped as to what Google is doing with the Google Science Journal. And I gotta admit, I have a lot of mixed feelings about this one too. Like, what is it? What's going on? So, what this is that it's an app that uses the various sensors of the phone to record data. Such as using your camera or the ambient light sensor to jot down what the lux amount is, or how many lumens something is. Or using the accelerometer when you throw your phone to record in the velocity of something. At first glance, this sounds incredibly dumb, to say the least. People throwing their smartphones to figure out what their velocity is that they can throw. That's not a great plan. I can't see myself doing that with any smartphone, because, even your cheapest ones are still a couple $100. But on the other hand, this is super cool. Going through, working on a science project, trying to get a super bright flashlight made out of LEDs and a solar panel or something crazy like that, and then you can just measure the amount of lumens it pumps out. That could be really, really interesting. So, this will be something that may or may not accomplish anything in its life. Who knows? I don't think anyone knows. Just like when push comes to shove, you don't even know what your password is. More than likely, your super complex password, you went and shoved into a password manager somewhere. And now if you went and memorized whatever 500 character password you made up, if you even did memorize it, Google is now looking at replacing the password with something called a trust score. So what is a trust score? Well, a trust score would use various sensors on the phone, whether it be the front-facing camera to look at your face, ask you to type in something, and it would measure everything you do, including the way you move your finger around the screen, to determine if your trust score exceeds a certain point, at which point it would say, okay, you're you, and let you in. Now, it's also saying it could use biometric solutions such as the fingerprint reader. And of course, that's assuming that you don't have one that has a scratch in it like I do. Right there, for those of you who are seeing the video version of this. It's a little scratch right in the fingerprint reader, and that does... It can't read anything there as a result. Unfortunately. The thing is, it uses a combination of all those things. So even if, say, your hand accidentally made contact to a power sander, and your fingerprints are now radically different while the tips are healing, or whatever sort of terrible accident you got into that has sliced up your fingers. At least when push comes to shove, it has every other method of trying to recognize if you are, in fact, you. Now, if it was anyone else but Google, I would have no faith that this would work. Unfortunately, let's be honest. Apple's been pretty shoddy when it comes to making software that just works nowadays. They've been missing the mark, to say the least. The same thing goes with Samsung. Their voice recognition software is just hilariously bad. And Siri ain't no prize either. Microsoft, they've been doing a good job at redeeming themselves, but then there are just moments in the past that make it hard to count on Microsoft to get something like this right every time. That something could go wrong when recording all of everything that makes you you, and then it just goes, oh, well, this one time you had a nervous tick. Now you don't have that tick anymore. You're clearly not you. Or something crazy like that. Google, on the other hand, has been doing a fantastic job with this. If you're not sure if they've ever done anything like this, I'd like you to take a look at the reCAPTCHAs. reCAPTCHA, for those who don't remember, is reCAPTCHA is a method that is used to determine whether you are a computer program or a human being. Normally, it would be letters and numbers behind a gradient filter. It'd just be like a picture of letters and numbers. And the theory was that the program couldn't read the letters and numbers, but people definitely could if they squinted hard enough. Now what reCAPTCHA does is that they just have you check a box that says, I am not a robot. And then it measures the mouse movements that you performed to do it. Because a robot would be a constant rate in a straight line to move that mouse. And it would usually be at a stupid fast speed, like 1 millisecond. So by doing that, by measuring the inconsistencies, the reCAPTCHA can determine whether you're a human or not. And in my experience of using them, it's been 99% accurate. There was one time I think I remember that wasn't on a exceptional site. Like, there's one site I go to that if you post more than 3 things, their contract with reCAPTCHA just says, you know what, you go start typing in letters. And they do that for a number of reasons. One, that particular site sells the privilege of not having to use reCAPTCHA, so they want it to be as obnoxious as possible if you're being a power user, to try and promote that service. And B, that's a site that gets attacked far too frequently by less than reputable people. Those of you who are tech savvy know which site I'm talking about, so we'll move on from that. I think there was like one time, and it was on a mobile phone, that it didn't trust me. And that was in the early days. I haven't had that problem nowadays. So yeah, this is something that's going to be absolutely fascinating. And, well, we'll see what happens. Might be something that's going to end up in Android O, for all we know. But in any case, we're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, I have to rant on this EU anti-hate speech accord. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Eagle Eyes on Tech. I am Eagle Falcon. So, remember a few weeks ago, I want to say it was about 3-4 weeks ago, somewhere around there, where Facebook admitted that their computer algorithm was human-based, and those people allowed their political biases to affect what gets posted and what doesn't. Well, on the background of that, I'd like to bring you to Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, and YouTube sign the EU Anti-Hate Speech Accord. This accord basically is supposed to stop hate speech from spreading. And this includes talks of terrorism and all that jazz. It sounds great on its face. That within a certain amount of time, less than 24 hours, that if anything that is deemed hate speech is blocked or removed. Or both. Now, on one hand, I look at this and say, fantastic. Anything to stop the spread of radical terrorist propaganda saying hateful, bigoted things on the internet. Lord knows we can deal with less of that in the world. And all that jazz. It's fantastic. Here's the problem I have. In this coalition, who is determining what is hate speech? The answer is themselves. And as Facebook has already demonstrated, they have potentially twisted definitions of what hate speech is. Now, I'm not implying that Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, or Google are promoting terrorism or anything of that nature. No. That's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about the potential that they would block opposing viewpoints to their own. If, say, for example, I posted on YouTube that I think that everything going on with the transgender bathrooms is irrelevant and, in fact, a completely political move just to have a talking point before the election. That the claims they're making are completely false. Which I have done, in fact. What if Google decided that that was hate speech? Then there'd be a strike against my account, I'd be monitored, and the video would be torn down. But the thing is that I raised a great point in that video. It was that all of a sudden now, in that particular issue, it's being brought up before an election. Particularly by a political party that has not been doing too well. That's a fantastic point, and I'm not the only one that shares that viewpoint. Now, granted, I'm the only one that has stated that viewpoint and then said, look, the two Carolina laws are just, they're both bad. Both the one that the city put out and the one that the state put out. Both of them were terrible, and both of them should have just let well enough alone. So the question then arises. Who keeps these four in check for what is and isn't hate speech? Does that mean that if my post stating that viewpoint is blocked, in order to actually get my word out, I've got to go fight it in the courts? That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. And now, of course, someone might say, but it violates your First Amendment rights. Clearly, you'd be able to win in court. And that's not necessarily the case. The First Amendment applies to government. that the government cannot suppress speech. These are private entities. They can suppress speech on their own platforms. The thing is that at least 3 of these 4 have major talking platforms in the digital world. Everyone shares everything on Facebook. Twitter is literally nothing but a giant conglomerate of thoughts going out, short ones in fact. Microsoft is almost irrelevant in this, but Google? God, what doesn't Google have a hand in? Now, granted, I say Microsoft's irrelevant in this because Microsoft really doesn't have a giant talking platform, but still, they're a huge tech giant in this. Don't get me wrong. Now again, the pact says it is strictly for helping to counter terrorist use of social media in Europe. But this is still something you need to look at with a raised eyebrow. This could end up being nothing, and I'm raising an issue over literally nothing. But it is something that still should be looked at very, very carefully. Because you never know when something minor like this ends up becoming the tipping point in which these social platforms have then used this as grounds to decide who gets a voice and who doesn't. In fact, that already being said, Facebook is already going through and using a very interesting AI to monitor everything you're talking about anyway, and then categorizing it. We're talking about the deep text AI. What this does is that every post you would make on Facebook, it would then use an artificial intelligence and a massive flowchart to determine every single word you used and try to boil down in something that the computer can understand for what you're trying to do. The example I saw originally on CNET, granted this article is from TechCrunch because CNET apparently no longer writes anything, which is kind of sad. They use the example for I need to catch a cab. And then deep text then boiled down that message to be able to determine that this person needs a taxi ride. And they're showing potentially within the Messenger app, right under your text, having a link to say request a ride. And then link over to Uber or your local taxi company or whatever. Lyft, pick one. This is cute and all, but doesn't it just make you step back and go, damn. Just makes you think back to go, could this be any more Skynet? Granted, there's already plenty of stuff in the tech world that already reeks of Skynet and digital Big Brother watching over you, and the potential rise of the machines and all that crazy nonsense. Granted, we're not at any risk of a rise of the machines quite yet. But more and more stuff like this comes out, and you just gotta go, dang! Now, this is, all joking aside with Skynet and whatnot, this is still a huge advancement. For a computer to be able to break down our slang and put it into plain, then be able to translate that into to normal English or whichever language, and then break that down into what it can understand, to then try to assist with it. That's really cool. Not too much of a fan of the AI watching everything I type. That's kind of creepy, to say the least. And yeah, they showed other examples as well. Such as being able to determine if you're selling something online. And then post prompts for like, oh hey, look, you're trying to sell something. You should post for sale and not as a comment. This is for discussions only, and that sort of stuff. That's all cool and fantastic too. Don't get me wrong. And we'll see. We'll see down the road how this turns out. Just comes off as something that's kind of creepy, doesn't it? Let's talk about Twitter for a minute. Twitter, if you live under a rock, even though we kind of just talked about it a few minutes ago, Twitter's the service that just lets you type out a small sentence or two of whatever thought you have to the entire world. I currently use Twitter to announce what's going on with this show, and in addition, what's going on with my Twitch stream. Announce when any of those updates are going on, all that jazz. So now, all of a sudden, people are kind of freaking out a bit when they find out that people are using Snapchat more than Twitter. Snapchat is kind of the opposite of Twitter. The messages you're sending normally are going only to one person. And rather than being on record forever, they vanish. Vanish, quote unquote, I should say. And the reason I say vanish, quote unquote, because anyone can go and press two buttons on their phone and take a snapshot of any message. Anyone can keep a record. On top of that, we don't know if they're actually being fully erased from the Snapchat server. It's still possible that a hacker could get in and get that sort of data if it hasn't been deep scrubbed off a hard drive. It's not likely, but it's still possible. It's also possible there could be some giant scam going on behind the scenes at Snapchat where they are, in fact, just saving all of your messages. No matter how crude they might be. I'm not saying they are. I am saying it's a possibility, though. Now, that being said, they are both kind of the hip thing with people my age and younger, or us millennials. So people are now looking at Twitter and going, that's a problem for Twitter. Yeah. This could be big, big problems. They've been struggling to grow, and now here they are, and they're going by the wayside. Which then leads me to this next report, with Twitter reportedly talking about merging with Yahoo. Now, right off the bat, even though Twitter is going down in growth and whatnot, they're still doing better than Yahoo. Let's not even kid ourselves for a minute. So I think it would be more of Twitter buying up Yahoo than anything. But they're in talks. No one knows what it could mean. People are just assuming the most wild, outlandish things. And really, when push comes to shove, I got nothing to say on this either, because this sounds as far-fetched as possible. And it could mean literally anything. It could be that Twitter just wants some of the advertising network that Yahoo has. I mean, Lord knows they already have a problem. And by they, I mean Twitter. Trying to monetize the popularity they have. That's always been a problem for Twitter. Yahoo has plenty of monetization at their disposal, but no customers. And that's about the closest I could get to saying that's what it's all about in the merger. To try and better Twitter's monetization, and Yahoo just wanting to exist. That's the best guess I have. Anything else is just starting to go into far-fetched land with giant square flip phones, like we were talking about earlier. That's just... yeah. I mean, let's not even go into crazy lands like that. Though, speaking of Twitter, let's talk about these crazy changes. So Twitter is planning on possibly expanding what you can post. Right now, the limit as to how many characters you can have in a Twitter post is 140. Characters include spaces, letters and numbers, obviously, and punctuation. Anytime you press a key on the keyboard that isn't an arrow key, that's a character. But they're making a few exceptions. For example, when replying to a tweet, the @ names will no longer count towards 140 characters. So let's say you wanted to reply to me, which would be @eagle__Falcon. That's 14 characters you've now lost out of 140 in your reply to me. Media attachments. Media attachments. When you're adding photos, GIFs, videos, polls, quotes, tweets, anything of that regard. That used to count towards the character limit. Now they won't. Retweets and quoted tweets. Those will no longer count. And then on top of that, you will no longer have to use a period before the @ symbol for a conversation so that people can determine what you're actually can now determine who you're actually talking to. Before, you really couldn't, and it was weird. Now, unfortunately, these updates aren't out yet. They will be slowly rolling out over the next couple of months. So on one hand, these are fantastic changes. On the other hand, this is actually a nice little interesting look into how Twitter thinks. Normally, like, let's take Apple for example, because they're a fun example. Whenever Apple works on something, they keep everything secret for a long time until it's ready to roll out, and then dump their announcement on you like at a press conference, kind of Willy Wonka style. And it would always capture the magic and build a ton of hype. Twitter, on the other hand, theirs is a lot more instantaneous. They roll out publicly with what their plan is, and then they're going to roll it out over the next couple of months. They don't give you a specific time as to when it's happening. Which means that more than likely, they haven't started yet. Not at least until this actually came out. That's why they're being so vague, because they're not sure when their developers will finish. Now, granted, this means that there's going to be no time in which Twitter holds their updates to themselves, where they keep it all in. Well, you know, there's very little hype that rolls around it. Which, honestly, in this case, is perfectly fine. Nobody's going to care too much about the hype on this. I don't know. I find it interesting that that's how Twitter's handling this. Maybe you did too. Who knows? Hey, we're gonna take a quick break here. When we come back, gaming laptops and the Mac rumor mill. And then, of course, I've got a whole hour of Computex stuff to talk about. We'll be right back.
How did I end up here? Lying in your arms.
Welcome back. Eagle Eyes on Tech. I am Eagle Talent. Oh, fantastic. It put the wrong bumper on there. That's a damn shame. So that was definitely not the edited one that fades out. Technical difficulties aside, let's move on to the HP Omen. So if you don't remember, because Lord knows I didn't, The HP Omen was... I don't know who HP was going after. I don't know if they were going after Razer with it, if they were going after Alienware, who they were going after. But it was a mid-priced gaming laptop. It was about $1,600, and its specs were so unimpressive that it just made me go, eh. So now the next generation of it is out. It finally got 6th generation Skylake processors. And we got 3 options here. You have an Intel Core i3 2.7 GHz dual-core processor, Core i5 2.3 GHz quad-core, or a 2.6 GHz Core i7 quad-core. Got 2 screen sizes, 15.6 inches and 17.3. You can have anywhere from 4 to 16 gigs of RAM. And both of these models are going to have 2 RAM slots. Kind of a disappointment there. Graphic card options can start at a GTX 950, which is only available in the 15-inch. And the weird thing with this is, let's actually just move on to the rest of the options. Your other options are a GTX 960 with up to 2 gigs of RAM, a GTX 960 with up to 4 gigs of RAM, or a GTX 965M, which I didn't even know existed, with 4 gigs of RAM. So lowest you can have on the 15-inch is a 950. Lowest you can have on the 17-inch is the 960. And they only go up to about a GTX 965. I'm not sure how much more powerful the 965 is to the 960. Normally when they got that sort of stuff, it's maybe 20% faster. Usually that's historically, who knows on this case. Hard drive wise, it has an M2 slot and a SATA slot. You could have 256 or 512 gigs on the M2 slot. That would be SSDs. Then you have a slot for a hard drive, which is either going to be a 1 terabyte or a 2 terabyte. The 1 terabyte is going to be 7200 RPM. The 2 terabyte is going to be 5400 RPM. Just stick with the 1 terabyte there. Don't even look at that 2 terabyte. Look away from it. Okay, just don't even look at it. Then, interesting enough, the 7-inch has the option for a 1 terabyte hybrid drive, which has 1 terabyte of hard drive storage and 8 gigabytes of SSD cache. Now, I know that's not how it's used, but come on, let's be honest. It's pretty much just being used as cache. This option do not ever touch with a 10-foot pole. A, the hybrid drive doesn't help you a whole lot. B, it's only 8 gigs of RAM. It can't even hold the operating system. So you don't even get the fast boot speed there. And C, the hard drive is 5400 RPM. No. No. Don't do that. No. Bad. Especially if that's your boot drive. Now, the interesting thing is that they then have a section down here marked dual storage. And this includes their options for having both the M2 slot and the SATA slot occupied. So A, this is artificially limiting your options. But the interesting thing here is that in the dual storage option, there is a 4 terabyte option using 2 hard drives. So that means in the Core i7 17-inch model, the only option this is available in, and they say it's only available for the absolute highest end one, which is the one with the 960. You can have two 2 terabyte drives. So why? That means there's 2 hard drive bays in the 17-inch. Why is that the only option? Let's pretend for a minute that I had this laptop and I wanted it for whatever, to store my entire Steam library on, and I wanted the full 4 terabytes. Why wouldn't you then give me the option for something to go in the M2 slot? Why not have a 128 or a 256 boot drive in the M2 slot? This seems weird. And it seems like a poor decision as to why they would do that. But then, yeah, you've got 2 USB 3.0s, you've got a USB 2.0, HDMI, your standard RJ45, and your microphone, your headphone out, microphone in combo jack. You have an integrated webcam that nobody cares about, and if you're actually contemplating using that camera for any sort of streaming or any sort of Twitch broadcasting, you're going to be getting an external anyway, so why bother? And it has a dual-ray digital microphones that, again, if there was any case you actually cared about, you would go get an external microphone. So, blah, 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 blah. Screen resolution, base is 1920 by 1080. No surprise there. Can go up to 3840 by 2160, so that is full 4K resolution. So, what do I think? For starters, the Omen looks a lot more meh than it did before. It looks like their budget Pavilion laptop. That they kind of just, hey, look, we stuck a gaming graphic card into a Pavilion, and then called it a gaming laptop, even though it really isn't. That's what this looks like. This looks like a reskin Pavilion with the Omen logo, which just reminds you of the old Phoenix desktops from way back in the day. Red backlit keyboard. I always love me some red backlit keyboard, but in a day and age where Razer Go ahead and has the entire rainbow in a keyboard, I think you can do better than that, HP. I think you can. But the big point I want to point out on this sucker is that A, HP releases a gaming laptop shortly after new graphic cards come out, and they lock themselves in with the old generation. It's all 900 series. Everyone knows the 1080M and the 1070M and every other 10 whatever graphic card is going to be coming out soon for the laptops. It's inevitable. So why now? You literally put out a gaming laptop at the worst possible time. And more importantly, you put out fairly low-end graphic cards. For gaming, at least. I mean, they'll run fine at 1080. But if you made the poor life decision of getting a 4K screen on this and then tried gaming at the full 4K and not know any better, I hope you like playing games at 5 frames a second, because that's what you're going to get. It's going to be painful. It's going to be painful for everyone involved. I know that everyone's trying to move to slim, light gaming laptops. But if you're going to do that, for the love of God, stop putting 4K screens in them. Your low voltage hardware can't handle it. And that's definitely the case here with the Omen. Yeah, you got some good CPU power in there. That GPU is going to scream for death. It's going to want to be put out of its misery. And then, of course, as I said, there's still the fact that the next generation graphic cards are coming out. Already PC Per, who pretty much are one of the big leaders in hunting down all the information for everything computer hardware related. They already got whiff that the last top SKU it's out. It's already floating out there. So they're saying it's not going to be long now until the Pascal GPUs, the GTX 1080M, GTX 1070M, etc., 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 are going to be available. And one thing I always push when it comes to these sort of GPUs is, what's the performance per watt? Pascal is amazing performance per watt wise. Now, why do I keep pushing this? Well, on the desktop, that means it's less strain on the power supply. It's less money on your power bill, and those aren't really all that important. What it does mean, however, is that when it translates over to the laptop side, there is less and less and less performance loss. When the Fermi cards went over to laptops, they performed nowhere close to their desktop competitors. This is the GTX 400 and 500 series that were the Fermi cards. They were power guzzlers. They pumped out heat like nobody's business. They couldn't handle what they needed to handle on the laptop side. It just wasn't happening. Pascal's gonna be amazing. In any case, we're gonna take a break here. Move on to hour 2 of Eagle Eyes on Tech. We've got Apple rumors to get to and Computex.